to obviously Sam Winterbourne. Hamilton Mayor Andrew King is proposing a name change for the City Council to Kirikiriroa City Council. He's proposed this in the monthly report. It goes to the Council on Thursday. Mr King's spoken to the Māori King on this and will shortly speak to us as well. So he cites the need for cultural awareness of a partnership with Māori. Actually, to do him justice, we'll get him on right away. I noticed Councillor Angela O'Leary has posted on Facebook today. The response from her followers about what they think of this idea is underwhelming. She says it's a bit random from the mayor and appears to have been inspired by a meeting he had with a group called Seed Waikato. The mayor of Hamilton, or should we say Kirikiriroa, Andrew King is on the line now. Good afternoon, Andrew.
Yeah, good afternoon, New Zealand. Good afternoon, Jim.
Look, this is why. What's the idea behind? What's your idea behind this suggested name change?
Look, I think it's time that we looked at our history as a whole and had the conversation about whether Hamilton is the right name or whether we look at another name, a name with a Māori, our traditional name.
Didn't Kirikiriroa was only one of, there was a pa, wasn't there, in the early days, but it was one of only a small number of villages where Hamilton is now. Why that name in particular? Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, Kirikiriroa is the pa that's right in the city centre, and Kirikiriroa means a long stretch of gravel soils suitable for cultivation, and that's exactly what Hamilton is rich soils, and it's right for residential, cultural and economic growth. So it's the right name for this area. Now, Hamilton has got a lot bigger than the pa that was in the centre of our city, but that is right here in the middle of our CBD, and that's where Hamilton's grown from.
So can I get this straight? You're proposing a name change for the city itself because you embrace further afield than Hamilton. So are you proposing changing the name of the town?
No, we're looking at changing the name of the Hamilton City Council.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but it was just...
Not the name of the whole town.
No, that's what I thought. It was just something you said earlier that suggested it might be the case. But Hamilton is the big city in this cluster, and would it not lead to some degree of confusion?
Well, I think it's about having the conversation and listening to what people are saying, listening to basically the people of this region and the people of the country and taking that feedback. So it's about the conversation. So
you would be the Kirikiriroa City Council in charge of Hamilton and environs, basically?
Well, we don't know what the final name's going to be. At the moment, it's Hamilton City Council, and underneath that is Kirikiriroa written in small print.
Yeah, I understand. Is there a groundswell of support for this, do you think, Andrew?
Look, this is about starting the conversation. This is about asking staff to come back with a report with how we could go about this if we decide to go about this. But this is about asking the people of this region for their feedback.
Okay, thank you for joining us. You've made that clear. You've explained it. Thank you, Andrew King. Just before we go, quick impressions from our panellists on what Andrew's just said.
Oh, I kind of like it. I mean, the word Hamilton goes back to the name Hamilton goes back to the land wars, doesn't it? So it has a slightly bloody history. I don't think there's anything wrong with a bit of redress there. No.
Yeah,
Lisa?
I love the name, but please don't make anybody pay for a report into it.
Oh, yeah, well, there's always a report.
It's New Zealand, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Don't.
We love reports. Lisa Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Lovely to be here.
And Finlay McDonald, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
That's us, everybody. Thank you. We're back tomorrow. Checkpoint now.
Kia ora everyone, RNZ News in about 45 seconds, and after that, checkpoint for Monday, the 12th of March. Tonight, a mother of 5 on her way to work at the Sunday market is named as the innocent victim in yesterday's police pursuit near Nelson, and a local tells us that is a high-risk road and police shouldn't pursue people down it. Jenny Salesa revealed as Parliament's biggest spending minister, the Manukau East MP spent $10,000 a month on travel in her first 3 months in office. Also tonight, the latest on former tropical Cyclone Hola. We're going live to Gisborne. The New Zealand wars and how to commemorate them. And finally, a payday for the Black Ferns. Not a big one, but it is a start. All of that and more coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister is investigating allegations that young Labour Party supporters were sexually assaulted and harassed at a party event last month. The media organisation Newsroom reported that 4 young people were sexually assaulted at a Labour Party summer school camp near Waihi in February. Jacinda Ardern says she attended the opening of the summer camp and there was no evidence of any untoward behaviour while she was there. Ms Ardern says she has not been made aware of any incident at the camp and only learned of the allegations from media this afternoon.
If that were the case, I would be hugely worried by that. Obviously, I've been overseas and have only just returned and haven't had a chance to touch base with the party president or general secretary. As I say, I will follow up.
Newsroom reported Labour's General Secretary Andrew Curtin was aware of the incident. Mr Curtin did not immediately respond to RNZ News' request for information. The children of Carmen Yanko, who was killed by a driver fleeing the police near Nelson early yesterday, say they're heartbroken and reeling from the senseless tragedy. Ms Yanko, who was driving to work at the Nelson Sunday Market, and 2 men in the other car were killed in a collision on State Highway 6 south of Richmond. The police say the car they were pursuing overtook a truck and crashed head-on into Ms Yanko's car. The 53-year-old mother of 5 has been described by the police as the innocent victim in the 2-car crash, which also killed 25-year-old Jonathan Tairakina and 33-year-old Philip Jamie Stretch. Stretch had served a jail term for a road accident in 2001 in which a young woman died. The family say Ms Yanko lived to be a mother, that she loved and lived fiercely and will be terribly missed by her family and friends. People in Gisborne are bracing for the arrival of Cyclone Hola tonight. Gale force winds have been battering Northland as the cyclone heads south, and a heavy rain warning is in force for the east coast of the North Island. Up to 40 millimetres of rain is expected to hit Gisborne overnight, coinciding with the king tide due at 3 in the morning. Gisborne Civil Defence Controller John Clark says the east coast is in the eye of the storm and there is a strong possibility of flooding.
On the basis of what we have available and putting that in, then yeah, our rivers are certainly predicted to rise, but not to any great degree.
Gisborne Civil Defence Controller John Clark. Toxic firefighting foam that's been illegal to import since 2006 has been found at 3 more airports. The discovery in fire trucks and drums at Palmerston North, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay airports follows the foam being found last month at Nelson Airport. Phil Pennington reports.
The Environmental Protection Authority has told Task Protection Services not to use the foam at the 3 airports except in an emergency and to come up with a plan to get rid of it. Task Protection's Contracts Manager Kim Reid says they have not actually used any of the foam at any of the 3 airports, not even in training. She says they didn't know the foam was banned, but inherited stocks of it when they took over the airport contracts. The Environmental Protection Authority says any testing for water contamination around the 3 airports is up to the regional councils. This is Phil Pennington.
About half of all workers at Lyttelton Port will go on strike at midnight for 13 days after last-ditch negotiations over pay and safety failed. Representatives from the Port Company and Rail and Maritime Transport Union met this morning to try to avert the strike by 200 union workers at the port. John Kerr from the union says the Port Company refused to pay about 70 members for some scheduled shifts last week after strike action was delayed as a gesture of goodwill. He says refusing to pay workers who had called off strike action was senseless.
That has really got in the way of doing a deal. We've said that any deal has got to include those members' pay being restored to them, and the company have flatly refused to do that.
John Kerr, but the Lyttelton Port Company says the union withdrew strike notices too late last week, leaving the wharves empty on Friday. A ban on products with plastic microbeads will come into effect in June, and the government is developing options to get rid of single-use plastic bags. It announced today that it has signed up to the United Nations campaign to rid the oceans of plastic. The Associate Minister for the Environment says scientists estimate there are more than 150 million tonnes of plastic in the ocean. And if nothing changes by 2050, the plastic in the oceans will weigh more than all the fish that live in them. New Zealand is the 42nd country to sign up to the UN campaign. It's 5:05. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association, Rob Nicholl, says the country's top women players will become full-time professionals within the next 2 to 3 years. The 5-time world champion Black Ferns were today officially put on the NZR payroll, with the union announcing it will contract the top 30 women players. The maximum a Black Fern can earn will be $45,000, meaning they'll still need to hold down jobs or study. Nicholl believes it won't be long until the top women's players are putting all their energy into rugby.
It's a great step forward. It's a start, and you'd like to think in the next 2 to 3 years, as competitions get sorted out both internationally and domestically, and so we can have 15s players full time within the next 2 to 3 years.
Rob Nicholl. The All Black Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw says they'll have to review how they build through a tournament after recording their worst result of the World Series season in Vancouver. The New Zealanders finished 7th after a quarter-final loss to the USA and a 5th place playoff loss to England.
Last night, the way we played was probably as well as we've played at any stage this season. So not to come out this morning and replicate that is really frustrating and disappointing. So we've got to look at how we prepare the team, I suppose, from the coaching point of view first, and then down to the players. How do we execute on day 2? A lot better than we did today.
Clark Laidlaw. And Fiji beat Kenya in this afternoon's final to win the Vancouver title. And New Zealand para-athlete Carl Murphy has clocked the 5th fastest time in the first qualification run for the men's snowboard cross competition at the Paralympics Winter Games in Pyeongchang. And that's the news.
Police defend chasers.
Those drivers that choose to flee have a choice. They can always stop. Please pull over and stop.
Winston chases Russia.
It seems to be policy on the basis of personal prejudice, and he seems to be, frankly speaking, an apologist for Russia.
And Dreamliners hit turbulence.
Some of the blades in these Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines, as they're known, are wearing out faster than originally forecast.
Start your engines with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner on Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Dr Sue Bagshaw's long-awaited dream to set up a one-stop shop for youth health in post-quake Christchurch. And after 10, the man turning New Zealand's marine invasive species problems into economic opportunities, Alex Pressman. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. There are warnings and watches in place for heavy rain and severe gales about the Upper North Island. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay. Rain with heavy falls spreading to most places, easing from the west tonight. Gale or severe gale southerlies in exposed areas for a time today and early tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taihape and Wairarapa. High cloud increasing and scattered rain developing this evening. A few showers tomorrow. Oro Whenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington mainly fine. A few showers about the ranges north of Wellington tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine today. A few showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, a few showers in Fiordland, spreading north and turning to rain for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods with isolated showers, more frequent about coastal Southland tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing and rain developing tonight, possibly heavy, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thanks very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Nice to have you back with us. We're going to begin with the story which is really just breaking this evening. The Prime Minister says she will start an immediate investigation into allegations a number of young Labour Party supporters were sexually assaulted and harassed at a party event last month. Now, Newsroom is reporting this. They say 4 young people were sexually assaulted at a Labour Party summer school camp near Waihi in February. Speaking a short time ago at her post-cabinet media briefing, Ms Ardern says she's not been made aware of any incident at the camp and is concerned about the allegations.
I went to the opening of that summer camp. It was I attended at the very beginning. People had just arrived, so certainly none of that was apparent when I was there. This is the first I've heard of any such allegations, but now that you've made them, I will happily investigate, because that is not the behaviour that I would expect of any Labour function.
Yes, you heard her say it then, and she reiterated, the Prime Minister, that this was the first time she had heard about the allegations.
I'm certainly not ruling out that our Labour Party leadership may well be aware. I'm certainly pointing out that it has not been raised with me till now. Obviously, I've been overseas and have only just returned and haven't had a chance to touch base with the party president or general secretary. As I say, I will follow up.
Jacinda Ardern speaking at her post-cabinet media briefing a short time ago. The Labour Party General Secretary, Andrew Curtin, has not yet responded to RNZ's requests for comment. We are hoping to hear from him before Checkpoint is over this evening. 10.5 minutes past 5. A Nelson woman says one of 2 men killed in yesterday's triple fatal car crash never recovered from a fatal crash he caused almost 18 years ago. Philip Jamie Stretch and Jonathan Tairakena were in a car fleeing from police when it crashed into another car, killing Carmen Yanko early yesterday morning. Ms Yanko, aged 53, was on her way to her stall at the Nelson Sunday Market. Shirley Way says Philip Stretch's behaviour spiralled out of control after the crash that killed a young woman in 2001, for which he went to prison. When he died, he faced 4 outstanding court charges, including driving while disqualified and failing to stop 4 police. Philip Stretch was also charged with a breach of community work and failing to answer police bail. They were the 2 men, Tairakena and Stretch, in the car that was fleeing police. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
All that remained today on the gentle incline of State Highway 6 is an oil slick and road signs warning of a potential hazard. It's where mother of 5, Carmen Yanko, was killed early yesterday, the innocent victim in a car crash caused when an oncoming car pulled out to pass a truck. The police said it was the last thing they ever wanted to see happen. Shirley Way, who knew Philip Stretch, says it's no excuse for what happened, but she doesn't think he ever fully dealt with the crash he caused in 2001.
His life was never ever the same after that, and because he was so young himself, it wasn't something I think that was managed or dealt with very well, because he didn't come home and stop drinking and stop doing drugs or anything like that. In fact, if anything, it escalated out of control.
Both Philip Stretch and Jonathan Tairakena were well known to the police. Stretch was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison at the age of 17 on a string of charges, including drink driving causing death. 19-year-old Jamie Kelly was killed after being flung from the car Stretch was driving when it crashed near Motueka 18 years ago. Ms Way says it was a very bad time for everyone.
Lots of blame, lots of guilt. She was quite a well-loved girl, of course, so I think, it wasn't easy for him. But it doesn't excuse what he's done now by any means at all. I think it's just appalling that he was even driving around at that hour of the night.
The accident happened just before 6 yesterday morning. Just prior to this, the police were conducting inquiries to find a wanted person and tried to stop the vehicle in Richmond. The driver fled south along State Highway 6 and overtook a truck on what is a blind brow of a hill. The Assistant Commissioner for Road Policing, Sandra Venables, told Morning Report she could not say if they were wanted for a minor or serious offence.
No, I can't comment. It's all part of the investigations that we're undertaking currently.
She said there could be a number of reasons why police pursue vehicles. In 2009, there was a recommendation that the police change their policy after an investigation. Ms Venables says another review was carried out last year.
So the purpose of the review is to better understand the pursuit environment and identify any current issues with police management of these events, and we're undertaking that with the IPCA.
But it no doubt means little to the family and friends of Carmen Yanko, whose wide circle of friends are expressing sorrow and outrage on social media. Ms Yanko, a former Waimea College student who was self-employed, was described on Facebook as a beautiful woman, a cancer survivor, and someone who will be missed terribly. This afternoon, Ms Yanko's friend of almost 40 years, Barbara Christian, read a statement to Checkpoint on behalf of the family.
We as Carmen's children are heartbroken and reeling from the senseless tragedy that happened early yesterday morning. She lived to be a mother, and she was there for us always. Carmen lived and loved fiercely and will be terribly missed by her family and friends.
The Mayor of Tasman District, Richard Kempthorne, says the accident is an utter tragedy for all involved, but he says there's nothing that concerns him about the section of road where it happened.
There's nothing that worries me about that bit of road. The thing that worries me is some of the driving practices that occur on our roads. So every now and then, extreme risks seem to be taken by people. On that bit of road, nobody would think of overtaking.
Shirley Way says the way police chase suspected offenders has to change.
As it was a lady on her way to work that had done nothing wrong. Last thing that would have been on her mind.
The Assistant Commissioner for Road Policing, Sandra Venable, says the results of the review into police procedures around pursuits are due out later this year. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Now, after 6 o'clock, we're going to talk to a woman who lives along that stretch of road who says it is well known as a high-risk area for all sorts of reasons. It's only a short stretch of 100k open road there, but people go very fast in and out of the communities on either side of it, and she will tell us she simply doesn't think police should pursue people along it. That will be after 6. Let's go to Gisborne now, which is bracing itself for the onslaught of former tropical cyclone Hola. The Met Service is warning the east coast of the North Island will get a battering later today and overnight. Our reporter, Anusha Bradley, is in Gisborne, where there has just been a civil defence briefing, and is joining us now via live view. Lovely to have you with us, Anusha. It looks stormy, but not unduly wild yet. What are the preparations and what's being expected?
You wouldn't believe it. There was sunshine and blue skies here this morning, John. But in the last couple of hours, the rain has set in. It's not heavy rain though, and they are expecting that really heavy rain to set in tonight. So as a precaution, the council and the civil defence here is taking a really cautious approach. They have issued some sandbags to a few businesses, only 4 or 5, that have suffered flooding before after heavy rain. And also they've issued a warning to farmers to move stock from rivers across the region, because there is going to be heavy rain later tonight combined with a king tide at about 3 a.m.
Right.
And they expect the rivers to peak at about 5 a.m. and, well, no one really knows what's going to happen, but it really is just a matter of waiting and seeing at the moment.
I see those cars behind you. If my memory of Gisborne is correct, they're heading around past the beaches towards the Cape, right? And campgrounds around there, some low-lying communities, lots of them up the East Cape. What sort of damage is expected with the king tide and heavy rain? Is anyone making those kinds of predictions?
No, look, I spoke a while ago to the Civil Defence Controller, John Clark, and he just said the storm has been so hard to predict.
Yeah.
They think that it's not going to be as intense as previously thought. They said this morning there are going to be severe wind gusts up the north of the tip of the Cape by Hicks Bay and Tolaga Bay.
Yeah.
I gave those couple of those campgrounds up there a call this afternoon, and they say that, look, they're not really worried at all. You might remember that 30 years ago, just this last weekend, Cyclone Bowler, caused devastation across this region in Hawke's Bay. They're not expecting anything like this at all. They say that their campgrounds are functioning as normal and they're safe at the moment.
Thank you so much for being with us, Anusha. So king tide at 3 a.m. Rain, which is heavy, but not, we're predicting, outrageous. Anusha joining us live there. Thank you, Anusha. Anusha will obviously keep an eye on things. We'll be filing for RNZ through the night and for Morning Report tomorrow. But at the moment, whilst it's going to be unpleasant, not grave concerns for what is going to happen along that stretch of coast. Touch wood. In a show of post-reshuffle unity, the National leader has rolled out his top 4 MPs on Parliament's front steps, where they face questions about tax, housing and the government's foreign policy. Simon Bridges revealed his new caucus lineup yesterday, which has seen all of his rivals in the leadership contest given slots in the top 10, except, of course, the departing MP, Stephen Joyce. Looking at this for us is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Yep, so Simon and Paula are one step and the other 4.
After the leadership race and the reshuffle, it was time today for National's most senior MPs to step out together. First up, Simon Bridges was asked about his apparent support for a value capture tax for properties and businesses that benefit from major infrastructure projects. That was despite 2 of his most senior MPs, Amy Adams and Judith Collins, taking to Twitter to denounce it as an envy tax. While he initially welcomed the proposal flagged by the Finance Minister at the weekend as innovative, this afternoon Mr Bridges took a different view.
What we don't agree with and what we will never accept is taxing individual homeowners in the way that he seems to be talking about. That was never something we were going into, and it seems to me that what he's clearly trying to do is tax individual homeowners.
And he was asked about his description of his MP Chris Bishop, and this comment he made while talking to the media after his reshuffle announcement.
There's plenty of room and time for a relatively young white man like him to come through and to show us what we've got.
Mr Bridges queried whether he had said young white man. He concluded if he had, it made little difference.
I'm sure I was not talking about his ethnicity. What I was trying to say, and I'll go back and watch the tape, I think we're probably going to agree to disagree on that, is that this is a really talented guy. He's a young guy, he's got the time to prove himself.
Then it was on to housing, where Judith Collins was asked whether National is in any position to criticise the government on this issue, given it spent 9 years in government. She acknowledged opposition is a time for reflection.
One of the issues I think that we've got some opportunities with is in some of the re-looking at some of the work that we've done over the past. And I always think one of the great things with opposition is that we can look back, think, well, that was great, but we can also do something a bit different.
Mr Bridges also seized on comments made by the Foreign Minister Winston Peters on News Hub Nation, questioning Russian involvement in the US presidential election and the downing of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over the Ukraine in 2014.
Look, I think it's troubling. I think there's some troubling alternative facts on the face of it that Winston Peters is using. I think what's even more troubling is actually what we're also seeing from him, which is some pretty idiosyncratic, frankly based on what seem to be prejudices, changes in our foreign policy. You know, around China, a much more sceptical tone, and then in relation to Russia, I think effectively a much more supportive tone.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Mr Peters was speaking in the context of trade deals and being treated fairly. The government has agreed to work towards an FTA with Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, but Ms Ardern says the EU is New Zealand's priority and she's not worried by the comments.
The reason I have no concern is because the context in which he's discussing this issue is simply around New Zealand's access relative to other countries, and of course, as I say, we are prioritising the EU FTA.
Jacinda Ardern would not be drawn on whether she agreed with Mr Peters' views on the US election or the MH17, except to say that with regard to the latter, it's indisputable the missile was Russian-made, but exactly who was responsible has yet to be determined. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Thanks, Jane. We'll be back at Parliament shortly, but before that, a bit of a turning point. In the history of New Zealand sport, the Black Ferns are officially on the New Zealand rugby payroll. Super Rugby contracts these are not, and All Black contracts they are only a very small fraction of. But the Rugby Union has announced it will contract the country's top 30 women's players with a retainer of between $12,000 and $20,000 a year and $2,000 a week assembly fee when they are together as a team. So they'll still have to hold down other jobs for now, many of them studying, of course. The chief executive of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association believes, though, the Black Ferns will become full-time professionals within the next 2 to 3 years, as in they will be able to afford to be full-time professionals. Joe Porter went to St Mary's College in Wellington, the 2017 National Secondary School Girls Champions, to talk to some of the current and potential future Black Ferns about what today's announcement means for women's rugby.
St Mary's College rugby players buzzing to meet their sporting heroes in person and buzzing that the Black Ferns are finally getting paid. Black Fern Leslie Ketu is also rapt, and she credits a bigger movement in women's sport and society with getting the deal across the line.
Oh yeah, I mean it's really cool, and I guess what's happened in the last year has just skyrocketed, and to have been a part of that is an honour. You know, I have to pinch myself every day that I've been a part of a successful World Cup campaign, but also the results or the offspin of that with all these discussions and what's come of it, it's amazing, and we're getting the recognition, and that's cool.
St Mary's First 15's Emma Brown agrees today's announcement is bigger than just rugby.
It definitely is. I feel like it's been too long now, and I'm glad that it's people are finally realising that we do the same thing as men, and now we're getting recognition for it, getting paid for it, so yeah. And
her St Mary's teammate Catherine Raiasi says the news is uplifting. These guys are your role models, right? Especially, young Pacifica and Māori players. These guys are your role models. These are the women that you look up to, and to see them getting the recognition they deserve, that must be inspiring.
Yeah, definitely. Coming back from a background of Polynesians and stuff, you don't really have the equipment or the resources to do things, and then just looking up to players who've got into where they are now is really good.
And Brown believes the contracts will keep more young women like herself in the game.
I know plenty of people drop out of the sport because of that reason, not being able to fund it or commit to it properly because they need to make an income. But now that they can do that and do what they love and get paid for it, it's just it's just truly amazing what you can apply yourself to do and just get there.
Leslie Ketu believes the Black Ferns are so successful because they've had to fight for everything. Hopefully things will now be easier.
It's all of that has made the culture and the legacy that we are today. So, having to train on fields that had holes in them and wearing jerseys down to our knees, that is what's built the legacy of the Black Ferns, and we don't want to let go of that as well. But at the same time, it's awesome that we can now get the resource behind us to be the best that we can be and continue that.
And you're fighting the bigger fight, the fight of women's equality as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean the whole country's on that. On that topic at the moment, and I think rugby, with what we've just rolled out today and the announcement today, is really moving that momentum as well.
The Black Ferns are still nowhere near to getting paid what the All Blacks do, but the dream of becoming a full-time professional women's rugby player in New Zealand is now that little bit closer. I mean, is the dream real now? The reality of being a professional women's player? It's becoming closer, yeah?
It's always been real. I've always wanted to. Now it's even more real.
And how does it feel for you to be inspiring such a group of, talented and energetic young women?
Very energetic. No, it's very cool. And I mean, I can't wait to the day to see these girls just, dominating life and doing what makes them happy and whatever they choose to do.
Just goes to show that women can do anything better than boys and men.
Yeah, that's pure power.
Amen to that. Mō te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Joe Porter aho.
And Rebecca Parsons-King was the camerawoman on that story. The mother of a dying whangarei man was encouraged by doctors to consider donating his heart valves and corneas to another patient, only then to have them rejected by Organ Donation New Zealand because he was gay. Cherie Etavano says she was shocked and surprised to hear at the last minute that her son Corey was not eligible to be a blood and tissue donor because of exclusion policies for homosexual men. But as Nita Blake Person reports, Corey's bigger organs could have been transplanted.
Corey Etavano was just 24 years old when he was involved in a car crash near Whangarei last month. He sustained a serious brain injury, and after being kept alive on life support for 3 days, his mother Cherie made the agonising decision to turn it off. Once life support is switched off, organs can be donated within 20 minutes, but if a patient lives longer, large organs are unsuitable for transplanting. Miss Etavano says staff at Whangarei Hospital asked if they would consider donating some of his blood or tissue. She agreed, and about 45 minutes after her son passed away, she was given a number for Organ Donation New Zealand.
And they told me then that they would not take them because he was homosexual, but they would have taken the bigger organs. I was shocked about it. I was and a little bit angry to start with because I couldn't believe that the staff at the hospital would sort of put us through that.
Miss Etavano says Corey had been with his partner nearly 2 years and they had both been tested at the start of their relationship.
I mean, rules are rules. I mean, we're not arguing with that, but it does seem strange that they would take big organs but they won't take blood or tissue because of the risk of infection. Well, isn't the risk of infection the same with your big organs?
She doesn't believe the hospital staff were aware that her son would be ineligible because he was gay, and says there needs to be more awareness among medical staff about donor requirements. Organ Donation New Zealand assesses potential donors, and spokesperson Janice Langland says they have to consider a range of factors. She says most people needing organ donations would die without them, but tissue donations are seen as life-enhancing, not life-saving, meaning the threshold for donors is different.
For somebody to get HIV or hepatitis B or C from a corneal graft, then that is probably something that most recipients wouldn't want to get.
She says potential donors are tested for infectious diseases, but there is still a small chance of some going undetected.
It doesn't matter how good the testing is, there is a small number of weeks where a person might have an infection but it doesn't show in the blood tests, and that's why we do have to ask the questions about social, lifestyle factors as well.
The New Zealand Blood Service decides on the exclusion criteria for donors, and the National Medical Director Peter Flanagan says they follow the same rules as many other countries.
Over the last 10 years, we have steadily, though gradually, reduced the period of deferral for men who have sex with other men. It's gone from 10 years to 5 years to 12 months.
Dr Flanagan says there's been no instances of HIV being passed from a donor to a recipient for more than 30 years, but at this stage there's not enough scientific evidence to warrant reviewing the restrictions. Mō te hōtaka o te ahia i nei, ko Nita Blakeperson aho.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, the Manukau East MP, Jenny Salesa, is revealed as Parliament's biggest spending minister. The Minister for Ethnic Communities and Building and Construction spent $10,000 a month on travel in her first 3 months in office. A third of the cleaning workforce at one of the country's biggest meat processing plants is being made redundant. We go there. And should the New Zealand Wars be commemorated as a national public holiday? John Boynton filing on this for us. We'd love your feedback. We're already getting lots of it. Thank you. You can text us 2101. Clearly many of you know that. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, where you can also watch us go to air, and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And if you have a story you'd like us to look into, that email address is the one to use. Business next, but before it all, Anna Thomas with headlines.
Thanks, John. The Prime Minister says she will follow up allegations that young Labour Party supporters were sexually assaulted and harassed at a party event last month. The media organisation Newsroom has reported that 4 people were sexually assaulted at a Labour Party summer camp near Waihi in February. Jacinda Ardern says she only learned of the allegations from media this afternoon. Labour's General Secretary Andrew Curtin has not yet responded to RNZ News' request for information. The children of a 53-year-old woman killed by a driver fleeing the police near Nelson yesterday say they're heartbroken and reeling from the senseless tragedy. Carmen Yanko and the 2 men in the other car were killed in a collision on State Highway 6 south of Richmond. The police say the car they were pursuing overtook a truck and crashed head-on into Ms Yanko's car. The Environmental Protection Authority has told a company in charge of firefighting services at airports not to use a banned foam except in an emergency. Investigators have found the toxic foam in fire trucks and drums at Palmerston North, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay airports. It was also found at Nelson Airport last month. Task Protection Services says they inherited stocks when they took over the airport contracts and did not know it was banned. People in Gisborne are bracing for the arrival of Cyclone Hola tonight. Gale force winds have been battering Northland as the cyclone heads south, and a heavy rain warning is in force for the east coast of the North Island. Up to 40 millimetres of rain is expected to hit Gisborne overnight, coinciding with the king tide due at 3 o'clock. About half of all workers at Lyttelton Port will go on strike for 13 days tonight after the failure of a final attempt to negotiate over pay and work safety. This morning, representatives from the port company and the Rail and Maritime Transport Union met to try to avert the strike by 200 union workers. A union spokesperson says refusing to pay workers who had called off strike action was senseless, and that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Let's turn to business news now with our business editor, who's beaming in from Wellington, I think, this week. You with us all week, Giles?
I am indeed, John.
We're delighted to hear it. You're going to talk to us about the Reserve Bank, who you've been talking to, and the insurer CBL. Why are we so interested in CBL? What's important about this case?
Well, I think this one, it throws up several issues. First of all, it throws into stark relief the light hand of supervision that we have about New Zealand financial markets. That generally speaking, the regulators are not proactive, they are not preemptive, they do not wield a big stick, that they tend to let the companies look after themselves and then they cast an eye over them to see that they're dotting the I's and crossing the T's as the rule books say they should. In this particular instance, CBL Insurance, which is one part of the CBL corporate group, is likely, I think, to be one of the, let me choose my words carefully, it has the potential to be one of the bigger corporate failures in recent times in this country. And some of the losses may be quite significant. It is quite clear that the Reserve Bank, which is the supervisor of the insurance sector, was well aware and concerned about CBL's difficulties, stretching back as much as 2 years. Now, they were beating us off for a while, and shall we say fending us off rather than beating us off. I had a long interview and discussion with Jeff Baskand, who is the Reserve Bank's Deputy Governor, who looks after the financial stability of our system. He said that there was nothing that the Reserve Bank could have done any earlier to intercede and to perhaps prevent or minimise the financial mess that is likely to unfold. Because of a variety of things. First of all, the company disputed the Reserve Bank's concerns. It wasn't willing to perhaps be as cooperative with the Reserve Bank as it should have been. The Reserve Bank was forced then to bring out and start its own investigation. And I put it to Mr. Baskand that essentially the year or more that the Reserve Bank was worrying, fretting and inquiring into CBL, the situation has got worse for policyholders, for shareholders and for investors involved in that, to which he replied quite strongly that no, there was nothing that the Reserve Bank could have done until, and this was the game breaker for them, until the company directors purposefully defied a Reserve Bank instruction not to send money overseas. At that stage, the Reserve Bank moved to put the company into interim liquidation, and that's only just a few weeks ago. So a lot of questions are to be asked about this. I give the Reserve Bank credit for finally putting somebody up to talk to us. They're not apologetic. They don't see that they necessarily have acted wrongly. I came away with the clear impression that executives and directors of CBL Insurance and possibly of the broader parent group may well face action in the future. We'll wait to see on that one. But I have to say that I regard this as probably one of the more serious failures of supervision in the New Zealand financial sector for quite some time. And that's going back to when we had finance companies falling over left, right and centre a decade ago.
Yeah, thanks, Giles. Nicely explained. Just before we move on to the markets, Briscoe's, another record profit. Did they another one?
This is the company you can't keep down. Rod Duke, the irrepressible leader of Briscoe's, he seems to have the Midas touch. They have 8 consecutive record profits, annual record profits. This one, $61.3 million. It's only up a few percent. And that's probably an interesting one because in the past they happily were recording double-digit growth. For the time being, they're fairly happy. I think they're finding things are just that little bit much tougher. We're not seeing, from their point of view, we're not seeing the impact of Amazon, which has set up shop in Australia. But clearly, I think they're girding their loins for it. But they seem to have some plans up their sleeves for expansion into Australia and also further homes, wares and sports stores around New Zealand. But for the time being, I think they remain the top of the retailing pack in New Zealand.
Thanks, Charles. What did the markets do today? I haven't caught up with them at all.
It was a stonking good day for the share market today, up 62 points. That's about 0.7%. 8452 for the top 50. That's just nearly 20 points off a record high. So if it has another day like this tomorrow, we'll be talking about records. For the currency, 73.2 US cents and 93 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the weather now. And there's quite a bit of it in some parts of the country. Met Service meteorologist meteorologist John Law's our man. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. It is looking like we've got some wet and windy weather across the top of the North Island as we go through the rest of tonight. But as we head through towards Tuesday, it's a different story. For the likes of, say, Auckland, we might still have a few showers to watch out for and still that southwesterly wind at first, but things will get better through the daytime. Some decent spells of sunshine and highs around about 22 degrees Celsius. There's still perhaps a bit of a showery story down towards that western side of the country, but there's some good breaks between them and some decent spells of sunshine as well. Highs in, say, Whangarei up to about 24 degrees Celsius. And generally, it's a fine-looking day in Wellington as well, up towards the Kapiti coast. A little bit more cloud later on, perhaps bringing the chance of a shower, but mainly up in towards the surrounding ranges, so not a bad day in Wellington. And we will find the remains of any early rain clearing away from Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. But we are going to find the best temperatures there, 27, 28 degrees Celsius, but getting better and brighter through the daytime. For the South Island, we have some showers moving northwards as we head through the day. We are going to find some breaks between those. Highs back in Christchurch, 21 degrees Celsius. But for the South Island, the best spot to be, likely to be up towards Nelson and Blenheim. Temperatures there back to around about 25 degrees Celsius, generally staying dry. Elsewhere, a little bit more cloud and a few showers to watch out for. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Just a reminder that our reporter Anusha Bradley is in Gisborne, where the worst of the weather is expected to hit. It's bad there, but not very bad. She will report if the rain becomes heavy or there's any sign of flooding, but so far, so good. It's 19 minutes to 6. Just before we move on, we began tonight picking up on a story from the Newsroom website about the activities of a young person at the Labour Party camp. We now have a statement from the Labour Party General Secretary Andrew Curtin. We're actually trying to get Andrew on the program, but we have received an emailed statement and it reads as follows. The Labour Party is extremely disappointed that young people attending the Young Labour camp were exposed to highly inappropriate behaviour by an individual who was also at the event. Young Labour has apologised to the young people involved. We are extremely disappointed that an incident like this happened at a Labour event, and we're working to make sure those involved receive any support they need. We are deeply sorry for the distress that's been caused. It shouldn't have happened. The Labour Party has initiated an external review of our policies and procedures, including those involving alcohol. This review will include our various sector groups, including Young Labour. We want to ensure a situation like this is never repeated. The morning after an evening in which we understand several young people had consumed alcohol, Young Labour was alerted to complaints in relation to the behaviour of a 20-year-old man. The statement from Andrew Curtin says, the camp organisers contacted me in the days following the event and explained what they understood had happened and the action they'd taken in response to it. Those included having clear processes in place, such as a dedicated welfare phone line and designated support people. We've also offered further professional support to those involved and have subsequently banned the perpetrator from any future Labour Party events. That statement in at 5:34 from Andrew Curtin. Let's stay with politics. The Labour Party. The Prime Minister has contradicted the office of her Minister for Ethnic Communities in Building and Construction, Jenny Salesa, after it was revealed Ms Salesa spent more on domestic travel than any other minister, including Jacinda Ardern. Ms Ardern said in her post-cabinet media conference this afternoon that Ms Salesa was hugely disappointed with her spending, but today Ms Salesa's office told Checkpoint her spending was within the rules and there was nothing wrong with it. Zach Fleming has more.
Do you know what? I would say that Minister Salesa herself isn't satisfied. In fact, she's made that clear to me.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Jenny Salesa regrets her spending of more than $30,000 in the last quarter of last year. That included $8,873 on domestic flights and $13,916 on surface travel, Crown cars, taxis and rental cars. That's nearly $2,500 more on domestic travel than the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who spent just under $28,000 total.
She herself was hugely disappointed when she saw the figures at the end of the month. This is not something you get a tally of daily. When she realised what was happening, she's undertaken to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I know she's hugely regretful at that situation.
But that's not what Checkpoint was told by her office today. A spokesperson said her spending was within Ministerial Services rules and in line with past ethnic communities ministers who are required to travel regularly. Ms Salesa wasn't available for an interview today and she refused to release her travel diary to Checkpoint. The Prime Minister said there could be valid reasons for some of Ms Salesa's high expenditure.
Because of the use of ministerial vehicles and her relative ranking.
Miss Elisa is the 14th ranked minister. Crown limos aren't always available to her.
From time to time she's ended up with contractors which are charged out at a higher rate, and that's led to an inflation in the amount of her travel spend. She now has an acute awareness of that and is undertaking to take steps to try and make sure that doesn't happen again.
In Miss Elisa's electorate of Manukau East today, many voters didn't even know who she was. Only one we spoke to cared about her travel expenditure.
That's not right, Edel.
Why isn't it right?
Because she's spending more money than anybody else. It's okay if they're going on the government activity or something.
Yeah. She's spending money on travel just to meet all the peoples around the island, which is a good thing.
But Miss Ardern reiterated for a third time in her press conference this afternoon that the spending is not acceptable.
The Minister would not want me to stand here and excuse it because she herself was hugely disappointed and is working to fix it.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
5:45, we go to the UK now, and health authorities have confirmed that hundreds of people could have been contaminated by the nerve agent that poisoned a Russian double agent in Salisbury. A week after Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were left in a critical condition following an attack. They remain in a critical condition, by the way. Residents were advised to take action to protect themselves, but there's now some questions being asked in the city about why it's taken so long for authorities to issue the warnings. This report in from the BBC.
A week on from the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, public health chiefs confirmed reports that traces of the nerve agent had been found at the Zizzy Pizzeria, but also at the Mill pub the pair had visited. Dame Sally Davis, England's chief medical officer, gave specific advice to anyone who was at either location after 1:30 p.m. last Sunday.
I think they should be reassured, this few hundred people, that their health has not been harmed. But I would advise them to take precautions and wash their clothes and their possessions, bag those that are only dry cleanable. But this is not a subject for panic.
Mobile phones, handbags and other electronic items should be cleaned with baby wipes, and they in turn should be bagged and thrown away. Jewellery and glasses should be washed with warm water and detergent. Officials say they're not concerned about immediate contamination, but the possibility that long-term exposure to any remains of the substance could be harmful. But they're still not identifying what the substance was or when they learnt of where it was found. Police closed the pub and restaurant last Monday and publicly revealed that the victims had been poisoned with a nerve agent 2 days later. Steve Cooper was in the Mill pub with his wife and dog when Mr. Skripal and his daughter were also having a drink there.
I'm a little concerned about how we can contaminate people that we've met in the last week if we have any kind of minimal amount or trace level of the nerve agent on us, whether it's our children, whether our friends, our work colleagues. I think we should have been told earlier what precautions to take.
Sources have told the BBC traces of the substance were discovered on and around the restaurant table where Sergei and Yulia Skripal ate. The table has been removed and safely destroyed, along with other items. It could be weeks before the premises reopen and the city returns to normal.
The city, of course, is Salisbury, that report from the BBC. We turn now to North Korea and the approaching meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. No sitting US president has ever met a North Korean leader. And amongst the senior diplomats who've directly advised presidents against doing exactly that is our next guest, Evans Revere, former president of the Korea Society, former negotiator with North Korea, former US State Department Asia expert, and former acting assistant secretary of state for East Asian and Pacific affairs. He's fluent in Chinese, Korean and Japanese, and he's spent his career studying North Korea's relationship with its neighbours and the world. And Evans Revere thinks Donald Trump is walking into a trap, or maybe even more than one trap.
My sense is that based on years of experience dealing with North Korea, one of the highest priorities for the regime in North Korea, for the leadership in North Korea, has been a face-to-face meeting with the President of the United States. And 18 years ago, President Bill Clinton seriously considered the possibility of meeting with Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il. And at the last minute decided it was not appropriate for him to do so for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was that the North Koreans were beginning to renege on a number of commitments that they had made to us. And also, and perhaps even more importantly, the Clinton administration believed, correctly I think, and I encouraged them in this belief, that the commitments that had been made for the meeting were rather illusory, and that the President of the United States was risking going to Pyongyang and coming home empty-handed and humiliated. The other aspect of the trap, and the more serious issue that I'm concerned about, is that the North Koreans, in my view, have not changed their position on denuclearization. They have no intention of denuclearizing. They have not made any commitments to denuclearize, despite the many headlines you've seen, and we can go into the detail of that if you like. And what they would like to do is to have a meeting with the President of the United States in which the two parties would sit down, and here I'm paraphrasing what the North Koreans have said to us. The two sides would sit down as one nuclear weapon state talking to another. Those are the very words that the North Korean foreign minister used with a group of us a few years back. And that the outcome of that meeting would not be a commitment to denuclearization. In the North Korean mind, the outcome of that meeting would be an affirmation, one way or the other, of U.S. acceptance of the reality of a nuclear-armed North Korea.
What does North Korea mean when they talk about denuclearization? Surely they don't mean getting rid of their nukes. Not really.
Well, I was quite struck when the South Korean envoy to Pyongyang came back home to Seoul and at a press conference had stated that he had had some important conversations with the North Korean leader, and that the North Korean leader had committed himself to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. And there were a few other words, but that was the essence of the message. That is an extremely familiar phrase to all of us who have been negotiating with North Koreans over the years. And we have asked the North Koreans what it meant, and the North Koreans, including the man who is their foreign minister today, has told us that what that phrase means is the elimination of the U.S.-South Korea Defense Treaty, which represents a threat to North Korea in North Korea's mind, the end of the U.S. troop presence on the Korean peninsula, and the withdrawal of the U.S. nuclear umbrella that defends our South Korean and Japanese allies. And as we've been told by the North Koreans, if you remove those threats, if you end all of that, we will feel more secure. And in 10 or 20 years, we will then be able to consider the possibility of denuclearization. That is what that phrase means to the North Koreans in their words. That is hardly the American or the international community's conception of a denuclearization process on the Korean peninsula, and hence by deep, deep skepticism about exactly what it is that the North Koreans have committed themselves to.
It's kind of intractable, this situation, because if the president engages, he legitimizes a regime that doesn't deserve legitimacy. And he runs the risk, as you said, of humiliation. But if the world doesn't engage with North Korea, then we do run the risk of this becoming a realm of no return. How much further into the shadows do we want North Korea to go?
I say all of this to you as someone who's a strong advocate of U.S. engagement with North Korea. And I've actually made the case consistently in the last 10 years for very high-level engagement with North Korea by a special envoy of the American president. I tried this in the Obama administration 2 or 3 times. I've recommended it to the current administration. But what I have had in mind is certainly not a presidential summit. Presidential summits, leadership summits, happen at the end of a process of negotiation and reconciliation and agreement on critical issues. Presidents and leaders put their imprimatur and their approval on agreements that have been negotiated by experts after all of the issues have been resolved. That's not what's happening here. Precisely the opposite is happening. We have a commitment to engage at the leadership level without anything having been negotiated, without any commitments having been made, and without any of the experts apparently consulted on this process. This is, as I said a little bit earlier to a colleague today, this is a violation of one of the fundamental rules of presidential summitry. And one of those fundamental rules is that you don't commit to a summit until you know the outcome, until you have a path to the outcome, and until you have an agreement with your adversary that you're both heading towards the same result. And we have none of those things here.
That's Evans Revere, former senior diplomat, including acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific with the US Department of State, and a former negotiator with North Korea for the US. Very wary of this meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un indeed. He was talking to us, by the way, from his home in New Jersey. No power, a severe snowstorm. It cut everything off. He had his candle and his cell phone, and he was giving an interview to RNZ. It's 5 minutes to 6. Should the New Zealand Wars be commemorated as a national public holiday? That's the question being asked of Andrew Little by Otorohanga college students who created a petition which led to a national day of commemoration. Now, the former Labour leader has previously voiced his support for marking the New Zealand Wars with a public holiday. However, a member of the New Zealand Wars National Committee says the government needs to first put its full support behind the commemorations themselves. How do we get this right? To Mana Korahi and Checkpoint reporter John Boynton has more.
At the weekend, Ngāpuhi hosted the first major commemorations of the New Zealand Wars o te pūtake o te riri. Former Otorohanga student Leah Bell spoke at the commemorations and says Andrew Little made a promise to her when she delivered their petition in December 2015, that the occasion should be marked with a public holiday. That seemed to come as a surprise to Mr Little's Labour colleagues Calvin Davis and Willie Jackson. Mr Little, who's now Treaty Negotiations Minister, wasn't in attendance in Northland, but says he heard the weekend was a success.
Certainly I'm a very strong supporter of the New Zealand Wars being properly observed, and it was great to see over the weekend that happening. I think as New Zealanders we need to know all our history, including the history that as Pākehā we might be uncomfortable with.
In 2016, as opposition leader, Andrew Little suggested the day of the commemoration could coincide with regional anniversary holidays.
I have in the past said, look, we've got all these provincial holidays. We haven't had provincial government since 1863. Maybe during those provincial holidays, actually that might be an occasion where, certainly those regions where it applies, that might be a time to observe and understand those New Zealand wars.
Mr Little says he'll discuss the possibility of making the New Zealand War commemorations a public holiday with the Labour caucus, but it's not a priority.
It's not high on the priority list at the moment as we're dealing with housing crises, prison crises and lifting wages and incomes and sorting out a lot of the long-standing problems.
Kawhia Murahi sits on the New Zealand Wars National Committee. He says calls to make the commemorations a public holiday are premature, and he can foresee backlash from the business sector.
And primarily that will come from employers' association, business owners, because there is a cost. They will be required by law to carry the cost of an extra day, a national day.
Kawhia Murahi says it's too early to tell how successful the commemorations have been.
In terms of public awareness, I think they've gone really well. In terms of success from a government support point of view, marginally well.
The budget for the commemorations is $1 million a year, an amount Kawhia Murahi describes as minuscule. Unless there's more political will to raise the profile of the New Zealand Wars, he says a national day will struggle to gain traction.
And I would be hoping that the Māori MPs and the Māori members of the current cabinet and outside cabinet do see this as a significant opportunity.
Ngāti Hine leader Peter Tipene is more definitive in his thoughts about introducing a public holiday.
The answer is yes, and I think it will accelerate things if it was made a national holiday and made people think, why actually are we on holiday?
A New Zealand Wars Commemoration Day set up by the national government was first held last year on October the 28th. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
Thank you, John. We're getting a lot of feedback on that. Basically, people saying it's time that we really commemorated the New Zealand Wars. And varying degrees of commemoration suggested, but no one saying that they shouldn't be commemorated. Andrew Curtin, who is the Labour Party General Secretary, is going to join us after 6 to discuss this party, where things seem to have gone off the rails well and truly. Newsroom report, and we're following up on that. We're also, after 6, looking at the deaths of 3 people in this police pursuit. Your feedback on this is unequivocal. Why are road deaths automatically attributed to police pursuit and not to the fleeing drivers? Fleeing drivers have a choice to stop. Infinitely sorry for all innocent victims, but it does seem police are damned if they do and damned if they don't, says Miranda. And Tony from Wellington says the tragic crash in Nelson yesterday was not an accident. The driver could have stopped and didn't have to pass on a blind road crest. Absolutely everyone is saying this, and it is down to the drivers. The issue is, and I had an extraordinary experience talking in October to a kid who used to steal cars and drive fast and wouldn't have pulled over if 1,000 police cars were chasing him. The issue is there are young people in our country who seek notoriety or status or infamy from just driving, and they're not going to be pulled over. And what do we do in those circumstances? It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister says she will start an immediate investigation into allegations that young Labour Party supporters were sexually assaulted and harassed at a party event last month. Newsroom has reported that 4 young people were sexually assaulted at a Labour Party summer school camp near Waihi in February. Ms Ardern said she had not been made aware of any incident at the camp and is concerned at the allegations.
I went to the opening of that summer camp. It was I attended at the very beginning. People had just arrived, so certainly none of that was apparent when I was there. This is the first I've heard of any such allegations, but now that you've made them, I will happily investigate, because that is not the behaviour that I would expect of any Labour function.
Jacinda Ardern, the General Secretary of the Labour Party, Andrew Curtin, says that there was an incident in which they understand several young people had consumed alcohol, and the morning after the organisers were alerted to complaints in relation to the behaviour of a 20-year-old man. He says the party has offered support to the young people involved and has subsequently banned the perpetrator from any future party events. And he will be joining John after the news at 6. Gisborne is bracing itself to face the brunt of Cyclone Hola. Gale force winds have been battering Northland as the cyclone heads south, skirting the upper North Island. A heavy rain warning is in force for Great Barrier Island, Coromandel Peninsula and Gisborne. Rainfall of up to 40 millimetres per hour is expected in Gisborne overnight, coinciding with a king tide due at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. Gisborne Civil Defence Controller John Clark says the east coast is in the eye of the storm and there is a strong possibility of flooding. The children of Carmen Yanko, who was killed by a driver fleeing the police near Nelson early yesterday, say they are heartbroken and reeling from the senseless tragedy. Ms Yanko, who was driving to work at the Nelson Sunday Market, and 2 men in the other car were killed in a collision on State Highway 6 south of Richmond. Conan Young reports.
The police say the car they were pursuing overtook a truck and crashed head-on into Ms Yanko's car. The 53-year-old mother of 5 has been described by the police as the innocent victim in the 2-car crash, which also killed 25-year-old Jonathan Tairakena and 33-year-old Philip Jamie Stretch. Stretch had served a jail term for a road accident in 2001 in which a young woman died. The family say that Miss Yanko lived to be a mother and that she loved and lived fiercely and will be terribly missed by her family and friends. Ko Conan Young Tēnei.
The company that's found to have been using toxic banned firefighting foam at 3 more airports admits it should have been more aware about the use of the foam. Task Protection Services says it's disappointed in itself and in the industry, but says it hasn't used any of the chemical. Investigators have found the foam in fire trucks and storage drums at Palmerston North, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay airports. It has been illegal to import the 2 types of foam, PFOS and PFOA, since 2006. The Environmental Protection Authority has served a compliance order on Task Protection Services to stop using the foam by early May and come up with a plan to get rid of it. The foam was found at Nelson Airport last month. The mother of a gay man whose blood and tissue were unable to be donated after he died says doctors and nurses need to be more aware of donor requirements. Corey Etevano, who was 24, was on life support for 3 days after a car crash in Northland last month. When the life support was switched off, he stayed alive too long for his organs to be donated. But hospital staff asked his mother, Cherry, if she would consider having his heart valves and corneas transplanted. Cherry Etevano called Organ Donation New Zealand about 45 minutes after her son died, only to be told he was not eligible.
We're aware of what they've been offered overseas, and what we've got on the table here far exceeds that. That's not to say it wouldn't be a good idea for a player necessarily to take advantage of doing that for a little.
I do apologise, that seems to be the wrong audio for that story. Lyttelton Port Company says it's disappointed that about half of its workers will go on strike from midnight tonight after negotiations over pay and safety failed. Representatives from the Port Company and Rail and Maritime Transport Union met this morning to try to avert the strike by 200 workers at the port. The union says the Port Company refused to pay about 70 members for some scheduled shifts last week after strike action was delayed as a gesture of goodwill. The union says this had become a sticking point in negotiations and they've issued strike notices for 13 consecutive days starting tonight at midnight. But the Port Company says the union withdrew strike notices too late last week, leaving the wharves empty on Friday. It's 6:05. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association, Rob Nichol, says the new professional contracts for the Black Ferns will stop the country's best female talent heading overseas. The world champion Black Ferns were today officially put on the NZR payroll, with the union announcing it will contract the top 30 women players. The contracts will range from $12,500 to $20,000 a year, and with a weekly assembly, some Black Ferns will be paid a maximum of $45,000 a year. There's been evidence of the country's top female players heading offshore after high school on university scholarships to places like the United States, England and Japan. And Nichol says today's announcement should stem that flow.
We're aware of what they've been offered overseas, and what we've got on the table here far exceeds that. That's not to say it wouldn't be a good idea for a player necessarily to take advantage of doing that for a little while. A couple of years experience and then come back and try and get back in. But definitely if you're trying to weigh up an overseas rugby opportunity vis-a-vis an opportunity to be contracted in this environment, you'd take this one every day.
Rob Nichol. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says Lema Sopoaga's Test career is not over, but the England-bound first five will only be called into camp in case of injury. The Highlanders player, who will join Wasps at the end of the Super Rugby season, has not been included in this week's first All Blacks camp of the year in Christchurch. And New Zealand's Carl Murphy has advanced to this evening's quarter-finals of the men's snowboard cross competition at the Paralympic Winter Games in Pyeongchang. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the final of the BBC series Her Story, in which Lise Doucette talks with Liberia's former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Africa's first elected female head of state. Dana Johansson reports on sport from just around the corner from Eden Park. And we have music in the studio from these guys, the Wellington Sea Shanty Society.
And on Lately at 10, we'll have an eye on books, music, people and politics. And of course, we'll be there for the breaking news stories as they happen. We're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow, and warnings and watches are still in place for heavy rain and severe gales about the upper North Island. So Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay. Rain with heavy falls spreading to most places. Easing from the west tonight, gale or severe gale, southerlies in exposed areas for a time and early tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taihape and Wairarapa. High cloud increasing and scattered rain developing this evening. A few showers tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington, mainly fine. A few showers about the ranges north of Wellington tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. A few showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. A few showers in Fiordland, spreading north and turning to rain for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods with isolated showers, more frequent about coastal Southland tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing and rain developing tonight, possibly heavy, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes exactly past 6, and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas doing the news. Thank you so much, Anna. Let's go back to the story we began the program with tonight. Labor says it's initiated an external review of its policies and procedures after allegations young party supporters were sexually assaulted at a camp. Newsroom has reported that 4 young people were sexually assaulted at a Labor Party summer school camp. I think people from all ages were there near Waihi in February. Labor's president, in fact General Secretary I think is the title, Andrew Curtin, says after an evening where several young people appear to have consumed alcohol, Young Labour was alerted to complaints about the inappropriate behaviour of a 20-year-old man. Andrew Curtin joins us now, Labor's General Secretary. You're there, Andrew?
I am, John. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Nice to have you with us. When was Jacinda Ardern told about this?
I understand that she was told this afternoon.
Right, and this took place on the weekend of the 9th to the 11th of February, so exactly a month ago.
That's right.
So why on earth did you not tell the Prime Minister for a month what had taken place at a camp that she attended and spoke at?
This was a party-run event, and we wanted to make sure that we were, in the first instance, offering a high level of support to those that were involved and taking action to make sure that we prevent these incidents happening at Labor Party events.
Hold on a sec, they're not mutually exclusive things. You can offer a high level of support and tell the Prime Minister, can't you?
And the reason why we didn't, or I didn't, is because the advice that I've got is that it can add more distress when a wider group of people become aware of the incident. We wanted to make sure that we would keep the confidentiality of those involved, and that they didn't get the impression that a whole group of other people knew who they were, knew what had happened, and were talking about it. And that's the advice I've got from professional people who work in this area, and that's why we decided to handle it from the party side of things.
Okay. Do you accept the newsroom report of events? Have they got it pretty much bang on?
I've just read that report when it came out of the blue this afternoon.
Okay, so I just want to read one of the a couple of paragraphs. According to witnesses, a large variety of alcohol was available on Saturday night, and many people, including a 15-year-old boy, were drinking. The mountain of alcohol included rum, vodka, cider, and a large array of RTDs. Now, all 4 of the victims of this 20-year-old were 16. Is it appropriate to be serving large quantities of alcohol at an occasion that is attended by 15 and 16-year-olds?
No. My understanding was that it was monitored by the organisers. Those people at that age were invited because you can join the Labor Party at 15. But I understand from what I've seen, the organisers had quite a good plan in terms of making sure that that those that were not able to consume alcohol didn't, and I'm still getting to the bottom of that particular incident. But the point is that there was too much alcohol there. We need to review what happened in that case, but also to make sure that at future events that alcohol consumption doesn't get out of control. The focus is on other aspects of the event, and that people stay safe. We did have, or they did.
People didn't stay safe, did they? I want to read from the newsroom again. The 4, 2 males and 2 females, are all 16 and were allegedly assaulted or harassed by a 20-year-old man during a wild party on the second night of the camp. Newsroom saying that 3 of the 4 had a hand inserted down their pants. Is that your understanding of events?
My understanding is that it was of that nature.
Right, so they weren't remotely safe, were they?
Well, this incident happened, and that is extremely distressing to those involved and to us who from the Labor Party. There were organisers there who weren't drinking, who were overseeing the social.
Well, they were doing
occasion.
a pretty poor job of it, just quietly.
And that's part of the review that we're going to conduct to make sure that people do stay safe at events that Young Labour or other parts of the Labor Party hold.
Right. Have you notified police?
No, because we wanted to make sure that we did a survivor-led or victim-led response. That's the advice that we've got. We certainly have got in touch with the young people, and if they chose to take it further, then they would have our absolute support to do so. And my understanding that none of them have chosen to do that.
Right. So they've been offered the opportunity to take it further and have chosen not to.
They've certainly been offered that opportunity, and none have taken that up.
Okay.
They've also been. Can I just add? We've also engaged a sexual abuse support charity organisation to offer those involved professional support outside of the organisation, and we've contacted another agency who work in this area to help us review our practices and procedures, working with Young Labour and other parts of the organisation.
So you are doing victim-led responses. You are getting reviews. There seems to be so many reviews underway that I don't know what you're going to do with them all. You have contacted the victims and spoken to them about whether or not they want to go to the police. You are talking to people who deal with sexual assaults and that kind of thing about the appropriate responses. But during none of these processes, it occurred to you to talk to the Prime Minister, who had been at the camp.
That's right. And that's the decision that we took for the reason I gave earlier, which is that...
you sure the reason you gave earlier is the totality of the reasoning behind that decision, or were you actually seriously embarrassed that things had gone so badly wrong here?
No, there were other people within the party. The Prime Minister doesn't get told absolutely everything.
No. I absolutely understand. If you decide to switch from Earl Grey to Lapsang Souchong at the party headquarters, then she's not going to be told that. But we're talking about a Labour Party event that she attended where 4 people seem on the face of it to have suffered varying degrees of sexual assault, where there sounds like a whole lot of really pissed minors. That's the kind of stuff you would talk to the Prime Minister about, isn't it?
I wouldn't characterise it exactly that way, John, but to respond to your point, we took the decision, based on advice from people who deal with these sorts of situations, to not expand the concentric circles of people who know about this. It can be very traumatic and embarrassing for those that are the victims of this. And one of the things that can add to that distress, I understand, is the impression that a widening group of people are told about it. More and more people are told about this instance. And that's not a victim-led response, and I stand by that.
Have their parents been notified?
We've been communicating directly with these young people.
So Newsroom has it right in their age? They're all 16?
That's my understanding. They're around that age, yeah.
Right, and so I presume they're still living with parents or guardians, right, at the age of 16? That would be the case?
I imagine so.
Right, so in a way, they were trusted into your care for the weekend, weren't they, the Labour Party's care? Are you telling me you wouldn't have thought to contact their parents after the fact? So you haven't contacted the police, you haven't contacted the Prime Minister, and you haven't contacted their parents. Should you, in hindsight, have spoken to their parents and said, hey, look, there could be an issue here. This is what's being alleged. Could you talk to these 16-year-olds about it and tell us what you think it's appropriate for us to do?
No, because the advice that I have is that these young people need to make the choices themselves about who they tell. I didn't want to go over and above their heads and cause further distress by contacting other people where they might not want to discuss it with anyone. It might have been something that they want to put behind them. We just need to make sure that we offer them the appropriate level of support, don't go telling everyone under the sun, and put practices in place to stop this from happening again.
One final question. Why would you have alcohol at an event where there are people as young as 15 and 16? Now, I know alcohol is a fact of life in New Zealand, but this seems to be a situation where you were, for want of a better term, tempting fate on the drunkenness front. How were you absolutely and effectively able to exclude the minors and the people whose parents may have had no idea whatsoever that they were drinking from the people who were legally allowed to drink?
My understanding is that they had some procedures in place to ensure that happened. There wasn't alcohol supplied by the Labour Party, is my understanding, that it was people came along and brought their own alcohol to the event themselves. And it's a good question. It's a good question, sorry, John, that, why is there an excess of alcohol at these events? It's something that we're going to be looking seriously into.
Andrew Curtin, General Secretary of the Labour Party, joining us live. Thank you very much indeed. This story just breaking on the Newsroom website just shortly before we came on air this evening. 3 people dead, one of them a 53-year-old mother of 5 named Carmen Yanko. She was driving to her stall at Nelson's Sunday morning market when a car driven by 25-year-old Jonathan Tairaken appears to have crossed the centre line and driven directly into her at very high speed. Tairaken and another man, 33-year-old Philip Stretch, were in a car being pursued by police. Absolutely not in dispute that they didn't pull over. Indeed, they looked like they overtook a truck on a blind hill. They simply couldn't see what was coming towards them. And a 53-year-old mother of 5 is dead as a direct result of that. Adrian Matthews lives on the road just south of Nelson where the collision occurred. She knew Carmen Yanko and is devastated for her family. While she blames the men trying to escape the police, full stop, she doesn't think the police should have continued their pursuit on a road well known to be fairly high risk in the area.
This stretch of road that I live on, which is the Main Road Hope, is an incredibly dangerous piece of road. It's like the Main Road Appleby, which just goes off it. We've got these 2 highways, Highway 6, which I'm on, and Highway 60, and they are probably one of the most lethal parts in the country, actually, for high speed and accidents. One of the major problems is that we've got these 2 little towns. Richmond's a fairly big town, and then we go down south to Brightwater. Now, that's a stretch of only 7.5 k's. Now, in that time, you go from a 50k zone to a 70k zone, and then just outside my place, a 100k zone. And that 100k zone, you're actually only on for 3.2 k's until you get to this other little town, which is Brightwater. So you've got a huge lot of general through traffic, which is going down to the down south to the Lewis Pass and off to the coast. But you've also got a huge amount of local traffic going back and forth. And one of the major problems is that there's many roads intersecting these roads. So you've got a lot of people coming on and off. You've also got many residents living on what is basically part rural, part urban. And there's this constant stream of, there's frequently accidents.
Now, we don't want to prejudge any investigation into what happened here, but do you think it is appropriate for police to participate in a high-speed pursuit along the stretch of road?
Absolutely not. I mean, look, I feel absolutely sick for the police that have been involved in this, and obviously it's not their call because the authorities say that this is what you need to do, but I really think police have got to re-look at this, because when you look at our statistics, I've been looking at them today, I mean, our statistics for road deaths and injury, which is huge as a result of police chases, is just enormous.
Yeah, boy, this is a tough issue, isn't it? Because on the other hand, there is a sense that if the offenders, if the people who are driving off at high speed know the police won't pursue them, they're never going to stop in any circumstances, are they? They simply won't be pulled over.
John, it's a very small town. You can't tell me that the police don't have other ways to pick up these people. You know, it just seems to me ludicrous that a decision like this is made. Okay, I know that they would make a decision maybe at that time of the morning because there's not that much traffic on the road, but you've got to remember that there's these big trucks going by all the time. You never know. And where the accident was, which is just over a brow of a hill, it's called Burke's Bank, you just can't see what's coming up over that hill. So I can easily see how this accident has happened, and it's just a complete tragedy.
Did you hear it?
I didn't hear the accident. In fact, even people who live very close say that they didn't. But I was woken up by the sound of the siren and the speeding. I heard I've never heard such a fast vehicle going down this road, or vehicles. It was so quick.
So you actually heard the pursuit going past your house?
Yes, I did. And then I just heard silence and went back to sleep. I mean, I didn't hear an actual crash.
And you've never heard cars going at that speed?
Never. The first I knew about this accident was I walked out my front, and there, right outside my house, was the huge sign saying detour lit up.
Adrian Matthews Let's go from the top of the South Island to the east coast of the North Island, Gisborne, preparing for the effects of former tropical cyclone Hola tonight. Just how serious is it? Joining us now is our Met Service meteorologist friend, Georgina Griffiths. Georgina, we always love having you on Checkpoint. Thank you for being with us. Where is Hola heading?
Right, well, she's currently elongating and lying just east of Great Barrier Island, and they're not having much fun out there at the moment, John. It's raining very hard and it's very windy out there as expected. It's the closest area of New Zealand to the centre. So I guess this really highlights, we'll talk about which regions we're concerned around going forward, but really highlights listening to Met Service use the word compact system, small system. And there's a reason why we don't put the warnings out a week in advance. We do that 48 hours in advance. Because during the weekend, the fact that it's a small baby, very different to Whaihi and Gita, which had warnings widespread for half the country. This one only had warnings for 4 regions, and it's mostly tracking offshore. So the worst of the wind, worst of the weather is actually out over the sea between North Cape, East Cape. So it's doing what we expected. It's slightly slower this morning, had a little bit of an elongation and slowed up a wee bit. But as you can see, we've had good rainfall and winds, or bad rainfall and winds, depending on your perspective, to warning criteria for Northland. It's nearly cleared now, so Kaitaia is cleared and Bay of Islands almost clearing. Auckland, of course, has got windy right now as it's a beam of us out to the east. Coromandel started to rain very heavily and pick up some of that wind. And that's likely to see that rainfall for reach warning criteria for Coromandel, and it's certainly well and truly on Great Barrier. The area that overnight we're a bit interested in would be the Gisborne region. You mentioned it before.
Yeah.
I mean, a bit of a low-end wind and rainfall warning for Gisborne, and mostly expected to be north of Tolaga Bay. But I'd have a look at the system at the moment. The forecasters this evening in the forecast room, of course, will readdress whether we're likely to see that burst of very heavy rain around midnight or the early hours, and whether we still expect that to meet warning criteria. Northland, Coromandel, Great Barrier Island, Gisborne were the 4 areas in the firing line. We may not see it play out quite to plan on Gisborne, but the other 3, been a wet day, short and sharp though. This thing's mobile and it's small, so really different to the Gitas and the Whaihis of the world.
Gosh, but when you say Gita and Whaihi and Hola, it's been a busy season, hasn't it, for cyclones and former tropical cyclones. Is this a sign of our future? Is this what summers are going to be increasingly like, Georgina?
Well, may well be, but I mean, I'm no climate change scientist, but what I would say is if you look back in the past, perhaps we've just been a little bit lucky in the last decade in New Zealand.
Right.
I mean, you look at the season of 97-98, John, we had 16 cyclones form in the South Pacific, and 4 of those visited close to our coastline. So we're on par, of course, for visitors around, we've seen 3 this season. And, of course, the first 2 are those really big babies, those really high-end warnings. Oh, yeah, and that's a good point, John. So when we issue warnings, I think that the key thing for people is, am I on warning? And is it a short duration warning or a long one? And these are, 9-hour to 12-hour kind of deal as she tracks past. But also look at the numbers. So 110 kilometre an hour gusts is very different to what the mess that gets made at 140 or 150 kilometre an hour gusts. And rainfall as well. I mean, for the Gitas and the Whaihis, we were putting 150 to 200 millimetres of rain in. I mean, we're putting 60 to 90 millimetres short and sharp in for these regions, up to 140 on the barrier. So the bigger the number, the bigger the mess. So we've been trying to say compact, fast, brief system makes the message feel close to it. And, of course, we've got a guy coming in on our social media, and he's at Windy Canyon on the barrier. I'm not sure what he's doing there in the middle of a cyclone, but he does attest that it's very wet and very windy out there.
Georgina Griffiths, we love it when you join us on Checkpoint. You're fantastic at your job. Thank you so much. It's 28 minutes almost past 6. Just before we go, a helicopter carrying 6 people crashed in New York City's East River, killing 2 passengers. 3 passengers are in a critical condition, while the pilot managed to free himself with remarkably few injuries in the circumstances. This report just in from Reuters.
At least 2 people were killed in a helicopter crash in New York City Sunday. Officials say the aircraft was flying over the East River with at least 6 people on board. Video apparently taken by a bystander and posted on Twitter showed the moment Eurocopter AS-350 went down. The point of impact was near Roosevelt Island at about 7 p.m. Officials say the pilot managed to free himself from the crash.
The pilot is okay. He was taken to the hospital to be checked out, but he was able to get out. It took a while for the divers to get these people out. They worked very quickly, as fast as they could. That's 50 feet of water there. There was a 4-mile-an-hour current, and the temperature is below 40.
A Reuters photographer saw 3 people recovered by divers and wheeled onto stretchers just before 9 p.m. Emergency personnel were attempting to revive them, but their condition is unclear. Witnesses described a hard crash into the water and say the downed chopper was submerged within minutes.
Someone climbed out of the helicopter and then was on top of the yellow raft screaming help and waving his arms like this, and we were waving back and yelling that help was on the way.
First responders and dive teams from the city's police and fire departments immediately swarmed the scene, joined later by 3 boats from the U.S. Coast Guard. The Federal Aviation Administration said it was investigating the crash.
That ends Checkpoint for tonight. Just a statement from police. Police are aware of the media reports around this Labor Party camp for youngsters. We encourage anyone with information they wish to discuss with police or matters they wish to report to contact us. That statement just in from police. Lots of you feeling incredulous about the fact the Prime Minister hadn't been told about what occurred at the camp. A lot of feedback coming in on those lines. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. On behalf of our excellent team, that is Checkpoint for this evening. Have a lovely Monday night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Labour's General Secretary says the party is focusing on the victims in response to claims 4 16-year-olds were sexually assaulted during the party's summer camp. Gisborne is bracing itself for Cyclone Hola as gale force winds batter Northland and head south. The children of a woman killed by a car fleeing the police near Nelson yesterday say they are reeling from the senseless tragedy. And a company in charge of firefighting at 4 regional airports has been warned not to use a banned toxic foam. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Dateline Pacific, covering the major Pacific stories of the day. In Fiji,
they proceeded to torture these men by punching them, kicking them, slapping them.
And in Kiribati,
he was aware that no passengers allowed on board. Weather at that time was not good. It was rough weather.
Dateline Pacific, now at 8:15.